In 107 AD, Emperor Trajan celebrates an extended series of games.
When Trajan succeeds to the Roman Empire, Rome is at its greatest. It's vast, it's successful, it's rich, and Trajan really personifies that, the energy, the success, and the sophistication of this extraordinary institution.
Under his leadership, the Roman Empire reaches its greatest territorial extent, 2 million square miles.
Stretching from Britannia in the west to Syria in the east. The 50 million subjects of Rome believe in a wide array of different religions and gods. But one underground spiritual movement in particular is gaining momentum.
The number of Christians is growing, and what started as a very small movement based around Jerusalem has now spread across the empire.
Dear Lord, protect our brother Ignatius from those who will do evil to him. Amen.
Christians. When they see a few of their high priests eaten by lions, they'll turn to our gods.
The Romans see Christianity as a threat because of its promise to undermine Roman conceptions of how power and authority were supposed to work.
A prominent Christian leader is brought to Rome to be killed, most likely in the city's amphitheater.
Ignatius of Antioch, he is clearly the target of Trajan's anger because he is arrested, brought to Rome to be executed by being fed to lions, probably in the Colosseum.
If these people show disrespect to the emperor and the Roman state, that's sedition, and for that, they should be killed.
Public executions were supposed to teach a lesson to those who witnessed them. The fate of Christians who persisted in their belief was a capital offense. It was a death penalty offense.
But this will be no ordinary execution.
Ignatius is convinced that he's going to die violently. And this is okay with him because Ignatius wants to follow the model of Christ. Ignatius is willing to do this, to die, just like Jesus, to be martyred. While Ignatius is on his way to Rome, he's able to write 7 letters, and it's because of these letters that we know who he is.
These are first-person accounts of what's happened to him, how he feels about it, why he thinks it matters or might make a difference.
The cheers of the crowd above, darkness and heat below. One couldn't think of a worse place to be.
There would have been hundreds, if not 1,000 people, along with all of these animals, cramped together in the Hypogean. You can imagine what this would have been like for Ignatius.
Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil.
He's got to ask himself, is he going to die with grace? Or is he going to end up some grisly carcass on the Colosseum floor?
Citizens of Rome, marvel at the worst criminals as they experience the true power of the empire.
The Roman judicial system was class-driven. if you were very, very high status, you would be allowed to do it in some way that was quick and easy and relatively painless. If, however, you were of lower class or you were a slave, then you were going to be killed fairly brutally. So we have the expression in English being thrown to the lions. We use it sort of metaphorically, right? But it was very literal in the Roman Empire. People actually were thrown to the lions.
Christians. When they see a few of their high priests eaten by lions, they'll turn to our gods.
So we have Ignatius's own words because of his letters, and they can really help us to get into his mind.
The cross, the hordes of wild beasts.
The whole phenomenon of Christian martyrdom is absolutely massive enigma in the Roman mind. Cannot understand it, just as they cannot understand the sort of joy that they see in the faces of the martyrs in the amphitheaters.
The hideous tortures of the devil.
He's saying things like he wants to be torn apart by the wild beasts. He wants to be ground like bread between the teeth of the lion. The language in it is extraordinarily strong and severe. Real sense of wanting to die, wanting to suffer.
The wrenching of my bones. The dicing of my limbs.
He knows that dying as a martyr is actually going to do far more in spreading the gospel than just standing there and preaching. And so when they see this martyr just stand there and die gracefully, willingly, they're gonna ask, what does he believe? And when they find out, oh man, Christianity is going to begin to spread.
The Romans planned to make an example of Ignatius. This was about to completely backfire.
It's not touching me.
There are great stories of Christians being thrown before the beast, before the lions, and instead of the lions devouring them, the lions lie down at their feet.
Our Lord is protecting you.
Who doesn't like that idea of a lion who's supposed to tear you apart instead rolling over to get a belly rub instead of eating you?
He held to his beliefs and died for it. Why? For something he believed in. And that must have been astounding to the Romans.
In the 1st century AD, Rome is the biggest city on Earth, with a population of more than 1 million people. Now, after 8 years of construction, the largest amphitheater in the ancient world has just opened.
The Colosseum in Rome is one of the most iconic structures in the history of humanity.
The new emperor, Titus, is a war hero who inherited the throne less than a year ago. The empire he now commands began with Rome's founding as a powerful city-state in 753 BC. It conquers the Italian peninsula, then ancient Greece, the seafarers of Carthage, the pharaohs of Egypt, and by 80 AD, most of Western Europe. To mark the Colosseum's opening, Titus lines up a fight to the death between two of the empire's best-known gladiators, Rome's champion Verus and the barbarian Priscus.
They're the prime athletes of ancient Rome. And that specific moment, you could say that they are the heavyweight champions of the Roman Empire.
What we know about the fight comes to us from just one source, but it's a really important source. It's the Roman poet Martial, who was a spectator at the games. He actually saw this fight and saw how it played out.
Martial's poem is the only surviving account of its kind. The fight he records captures some of the contradictions of Rome. Its combatants are celebrated, but they are also enslaved.
Can you imagine if you are a gladiator from Germany and you look up at the imperial box and there is Rome's emperor in the flesh with the power of life and death over you? Well, that must have been an overwhelming experience. The emperor's presence in the imperial box was absolutely key. The emperor could see everyone and everyone could see him.
The games are all about the Roman emperors giving the people what they need, and it's always described as bread and circuses. They had to feed the people of Rome, but once they were fed, they had to be entertained.
Let the games begin!
The schedule is an astonishing festival of death.
The standard sequence of events was as follows. In the morning is when you had the venationes, the beast combats. At noon, the meridiani. This is when the executions of criminals condemned to death took place in ways that were memorable. And in the afternoon is when you had the paired combats, the gladiators, the ones that entertained most of the people.
When we were out there, you were not my friend. You were not my brother. You are my enemy.
There are huge stakes for Priscus and Verus. The pressure must have been incredible. They are the headlining fight. And they will walk into that arena knowing that one of them may not walk out of there alive.
Gladiators enter the arena through the Porta Sana Vivaria, the gate of life. If victorious, they leave the same way. If defeated, they exit through the Porta Libitina, the gate of death. The winner will be given a rudus, a wooden staff given as a trophy which symbolizes his freedom.
So the stakes couldn't be higher. It's death or freedom.
Imagine having a huge metal pot, essentially, on your head. You can't breathe. Your eyesight's limited. You're lifting a heavy shield. You've got 35 to 40 pounds of armor. The noise of the crowd, the heat, your heart pumping. And remember, you're fighting for your life on top of that. It's going to take nerves of steel. But if you fight bravely enough and the emperor graces you, it's the chance of being free, of becoming a citizen, of becoming someone normal.
They'd battled to a brutal draw. Now each was dead on his feet, but Caesar was bound by the letter of his own law. The rules were clear. There had to be a winner, and only a raised finger could stop the bout.
If the gladiator is wounded, if he's down on the sands, he can lift his finger and ask for missio, ask for survival.
What Marshall says is that they both submitted, and the crowd don't know what to make of it.
One staff, one winner.
The outcome of the games is ultimately decided by the emperor, but he's there to please the audience. It's very rare that the emperor's going to go against the people because he does not want to be unpopular.
And the crowd, you can imagine, are going wild. Some of them will have been cheering for Priscus, some cheering for Verus. What's the emperor going to do? He might say, well, you've both submitted. You should both die.
Ultimately, Titus is going to have to make a decision, but he cannot go against his word.
There is only one staff. And that means there can only be one winner!
Holding the rudis, this symbol of liberty, Titus is literally holding their life and death in his hands.
To you both. Champions of Rome!
Titus ultimately doesn't designate one the winner and one the loser. Both were the victors. Victors, in this case, over death.
Titus is stealing the limelight, but he's showing that he is ultimately in charge of life and death over everybody. And if you fight well, if you serve him well, if you're loyal to the emperor, then you will be rewarded.
Titus has used his political instincts to turn a potential embarrassment into a triumph.
It's a culmination of power, of control, of distraction. It's everything, really, that the Colosseum stood for. Imagine what it must feel like for Priscus and Verus. Overwhelming relief, pride, joy, and they will have been conscious that they're going to be remembered forever. And here we are still talking about them.
By 192 AD, the Colosseum is over a century old. Emperor Commodus has a surprise. He's the headline bout, fighting as a gladiator.
Gladiators were at the lowest strata of free Romans. They had no legal personality. They were in the same category as prostitutes and pimps. So for a Roman emperor to try to leverage the popularity of gladiators by becoming one is a shock.
For Commodus, the Colosseum would become an obsession, a place that would play a pivotal role in his rise and fall.
After inheriting a vast and powerful empire from his father, the great Marcus Aurelius, Commodus is at odds with the ruling class of Rome, the Senate.
The Senate has remained the most powerful body of people, the very embodiment of the elite of Rome. The Senate would always be the rallying place of opposition.
The Roman elite was ashamed of Commodus's actions. They felt that to fight as a gladiator was to willingly debase himself. This was the tipping point in an already fractured relationship between the two most powerful forces in Rome, the emperor and the Senate. Every one of these senatorial families has holdings all over the Roman Empire. They're the equivalent of small multinational corporations. They are wealthy in a way that is impossible for us to understand. So even if the heart of political power has moved elsewhere, these are still tremendously important people. And so the Senate is dangerous.
Several emperors had previously been destroyed by their enemies in the Senate, including the notorious leaders Caligula, Nero, and Domitian.
The history of Rome's emperors shows that it's pretty dangerous to cross the Senate. But Commodus had a plan, and it really was to ignore the Senate and to appeal directly to the people.
To win the people over, Commodus has an incredible tool at his disposal. He has the games.
Less than a year into his reign, Commodus throws lavish games to celebrate the end of his father's barbarian wars.
Because it was such an important event, the imperial family, such as his sister Lucilla, would be there. And of course, the Senate themselves, so they would have been witness to this event. For the Senate, they understand that this is an absolute joke. Triumphal games were put on at the end of great wars fought for many years, wars that established the power of Rome. This was the opposite of that, and yet here he was parading himself as some sort of triumphant general.
But it's not the Senate Commodus is trying to impress.
Emperors could communicate with the people in the Colosseum. In those days, you didn't see the emperor very much, except it triumphs after great victories abroad, and in the Colosseum, where he appeared in his box. And the crowd had a chance to express what they thought of him, too.
The Colosseum fostered an active, dynamic relationship between the people and the emperor. And one can imagine thousands and thousands of people chanting what they want, encouraging the emperor in what he's doing, in sponsoring and being generous, and putting on a show for them.
It was kind of like a contract. I am giving these games to you. You need to honor me.
It's extraordinary for an emperor to take to the sands himself. This is not something that's expected of elites, let alone the emperor. Gladiators use their bodies to please the masses. So they are like prostitutes. They are like actors.
It would have been hard for the ruling class to accept any of Commodus's actions. They were cultured people, they were educated people. And so the fact that one of them would degrade himself to that degree that he's going to present himself in the same profession of the scum of the scum.
According to Cassius Dio, Commodus charges the bankrupt Roman treasury 1 million sesterces for his appearance, almost $10 million in today's money.
After the games, Commodus embarks on a still grander project. He intends to rebuild Rome with himself at the center.
He renames Rome Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. And we wouldn't believe that this was true if it were not for the fact the coins of Commodus's era show that this was the case. He really did name it after himself.
Commodus goes into overdrive. The Romans are going to be called Commodiani. The Senate is going to be called the Fortunate Commodiani Senate. He fills the city with statues of himself, dressed as the god Hercules.
One was a giant figure of an archer, looking very much like the emperor himself, with an arrow aimed right at the front door of the Roman Senate. And if there was ever a louder political message, well, I'm not aware of it.
That could not be tolerated, even by Commodus's world-weary contemporaries.
When Commodus announces yet another games with himself as the star, the Senate know they must act.
Commodus meets his end at the hands of his gladiatorial trainer, at the hands of Narcissus, acting on the orders of the Senate.
There's a sort of poetic irony that in the end, it was the very figure that he so admired, so wanted to be, that put an end to his life.
'83 AD, the opening day of a new series of games that Emperor Domitian promises will be dazzling. The headline, the most extravagant beast hunt Rome has ever seen.
The beast hunts were much more than just fighting animals. It was a way to demonstrate Roman control over the entire world, both the human world and also the natural world. Domitian really wanted to demonstrate that he, in fact, was master of all.
Domitian is a real contrast to his brother and father. While his father, Vespasian, had been a bluff man of the people, and Titus had been charming and suave, Domitian was all harsh edges.
From Domitian's perspective, to follow his father Vespasian, his elder brother Titus, that was a difficult act. In terms of military prowess, in terms of their popularity. So Domitian had to strike out in a different direction to win the goodwill of the Roman people. He decides to use the power of the Colosseum by putting on the greatest show that anyone had ever seen.
At the center of this deadly spectacle, one man, a famed Beastmaster, or Bestiarius, charged with facing 20 wild beasts, one after the other.
Most of them weren't successful long enough for us to learn their name. But there was one Beastmaster that the poet Martial mentions. His name is Carpophorus.
To have caught the attention of a poet of Martial's caliber, the fight must have been incredible.
Beastmasters were enslaved people. And so therefore, they were also a display of Roman domination over the people subjected by the Roman Empire.
These games will be bigger, bolder, and better than anything Rome has ever witnessed. The Emperor has requested one Beastmaster to be the main event of the morning opening. A fight with 20 beasts, one after another. The man Rome demands is Carpophorus.
There was rivalry between opposing Beastmasters. After all, there was glory, fame, and potential freedom at stake. We have evidence of this in cursed tablets that were found in the amphitheater in Carthage. The cursed tablets contain spells and magical symbols that were meant to evoke the help of demons to harm rival beastmasters.
Kill, destroy, and wound Gallicus at his hour in the ring of the amphitheater.
It's a very cutthroat industry, and obviously everybody's vying for that one spot. It's a very narcissistic sport. And what we know is that they really hated each other in certain moments, or entreating the gods to do nasty things to other beast hunters.
Bind Gallicus, the son of Prima. Let the bear crush him and wound him.
I'm sorry, my friend. The gods will decide our fate now.
The commencement of the games was a major deal for the city of Rome. These took place on holidays. A great portion of the population would have had the day off.
I think it's impossible to overstate the kind of excitement and energy of a crowd that's been pent up to see blood. The buzz would have been building for months by the time at least 50,000 people made their way to the Colosseum and packed themselves in.
You can imagine for someone like Carpophorus beneath the floor of the amphitheater and waiting for his turn to go up and fight these 20 beasts. This is an opportunity of a lifetime.
We can imagine the stink of fear, the smell of wild animals. Everything is ready to go. You can hear the buzz of the crowd above.
There's almost like a religious aspect to the lion. He's this revered animal, much as the eagle was to the Romans. He's the top predator. He's the top of the food chain. And that, for the Romans, is a representation of Rome.
The lion has always been a symbol of strength and ferocity in many ancient societies. They appeared in the palaces of Babylonian kings and in the court of Alexander the Great. But what the Romans do is they import lions in their thousands. So this is the Romans, as ever, trying to go one step further than the civilization that went before them. So they're saying, it's not just that we can kill lions, it's that we can mass slaughter the most ferocious and powerful creature that Mother Nature has to offer.
For Carpophorus, it's an epic achievement that, sure enough, has made his name live down in history.
Perhaps by his victory and accomplishments, Carpophorus actually challenged the very foundations of Roman society. Here was an enslaved person who actually elevated himself as a hero and, in victory, became a symbol to the Roman people of success.
It's 83 AD, just 3 years after the Colosseum's triumphant opening. But Rome's new emperor, Domitian, is launching what he promises will be the most astonishing games of all time.
Giving successful games was a fundamental part of being a successful emperor. His predecessors had built the Colosseum. He wanted to do them one better.
He's got to prove himself to the people of Rome, to the empire, that he is worthy of the mantle.
He plans a surprise, ordering a major renovation to the Colosseum, digging a vast labyrinth beneath the arena floor. It's called a hypogeum, and through its sophisticated engineering, animals, humans, and scenery will suddenly appear before the spectators.
It's going to add another layer of visual complexity to the Colosseum. So rather than people walking out of doors and walking slowly into the middle of the Colosseum, they're going to appear up through the floor as if by magic.
To engineer this complex hypogeum beneath the arena, Domitian relies on a skilled master builder, Hatarius.
The job of creating a subterranean aspect for the Colosseum, well, that was a task for an engineering genius.
Hatarius and his team would undoubtedly have been under a lot of pressure not to screw up, to make sure that on game day, everything came off according to plan.
Especially the complex special effects machinery designed to dazzle the crowd.
In order to lift huge cages from the hypogeum to the floor of the Colosseum, the special effects man underneath the Colosseum turned huge capstans in order to make sure that both the people, the animals, and the scenery arrived instantly in the spot that they were needed for the show.
But there's a problem. Hatarius's machinery isn't working. Now, he needs to find a solution.
No good idea came from an exhausted mind. Get some sleep. If I don't think of something, Father, I'll be sleeping forever soon enough. I can't help you. You left me behind years ago with your forces and multipliers. What is it? Pulleys. The same force applied. 3 more pulleys.
Pulleys in particular are vital for the proper functioning of the hypogeum. It's almost like an underground sailing ship. Ropes and pulleys are everywhere, lifting enormous loads constantly to the floor of the arena. So Romans don't have power tools, obviously, but they do have a series of physical devices that multiply the power that actually produce amazing results.
All the pressure would have been on the builder, Hatarius. The whole question, though, is could he pull it off?
You can imagine what kind of sense of anticipation there was. But equally, of course, for Domitian, it just raises the stakes.
The crowd could get nasty if they weren't excited by it. But when you have gladiators coming up through the floor, when you have beasts coming up through the floor, changes of scenery coming up through the floor, that's the kind of thing that's going to excite the crowd and get them on board. Waiting under the floor of the Colosseum for the festivities to begin would have been kind of a hellish and surreal experience. You would have heard the cries of injured people. You would have heard the growls of wild beasts. You would see chained criminals who were awaiting execution.
It must have been an intoxicating but pretty horrifying experience.
People of Rome, welcome, one and all, to the greatest games ever witnessed.
Mine's strong. The men are ready.
By order of the Emperor Domitian.
Make sure when we pull together. And pray.
A spectacle above any before.
Let the games begin!
What's going on? This can't be. Pull it! Come on!
It was a crucible of tension.
Pull it! Come on! Get done! Now pull! Come on, push! Go!
The Colosseum had played host to all sorts of really incredible spectacles over the years, but this was on a whole other level. The idea of wild beasts, beastmasters, appearing up through the floor, nobody had ever seen anything like that.
One of the amazing things that the poet Martial describes was the incredible special effects in the Colosseum that were made possible because of the hypogeum. He says, a cliff crawled, a woods ran forward, a wonder to behold.
Unexpected things can pop up from the stadium floor at any moment. And something that you couldn't see anywhere else in the Empire.
It would have been way beyond the experience of any normal person.
This had to be the greatest day they've ever had in the Colosseum.
50,000 people were at these games. And the result of these games for Domitian was terrific. Domitian is someone who played to the crowd. He knew that he had to be popular, and they helped give him a reputation as a friend of the Roman people.
Haterius succeeds and survives.
We have some sense of what happened to Haterius after this because we have his tomb. The tomb of the Heteri. This is where he lays out his life story. It's where he tells us about his involvement in the construction of the Colosseum. This was a high point of his life. It was important enough that he felt that he should celebrate it even in death.
With this vast arena finally complete, Haterius and the three Flavian emperors create one of the wonders of the ancient world, an enduring emblem of the emperor's power and Rome's might.
The Colosseum is instantly recognizable, and the word itself has come to symbolize the Roman Empire at its greatest.
(401 AD). It's now more than 300 years since the inaugural games were held at the Colosseum. Both Rome and the arena have changed.
At this point, the Colosseum would have been a somewhat sad reminder of a more glorious earlier age. In a way, this is a reflection of what was happening in Rome's empire itself.
This is now a new era of Roman history. Rome is no longer what it was. Rome is in decline.
The empire was beset on all sides by barbarian invaders who sensed Rome's weakness. There were Saxons in the north, there were Goths along the Danube frontier, Franks along the Rhine, Persians in the east. Rome was under threat.
The once invincible Roman army struggles to hold back the tide of enemies on multiple fronts. In 395 AD, the empire itself is split into two halves, neither centered in Rome.
It was simply too big for any one person to handle. So each half of the Roman Empire is ruled by one of the sons of Theodosius, the last man to rule a united Roman Empire. The 16-year-old Arcadius rules from Constantinople in the east, and the 15-year-old Honorius rules from Milan in the west.
They are very young, they're very inexperienced, and they are clearly not up to the job.
Neither of them ever visits Rome. This means that the city that is the ideological and spiritual heart of the empire is something of a backwater.
But one man wants to revive Rome by holding the most lavish games seen in the Colosseum for many years. His name is Symmachus.
This is a man who was highly literate, who produced a lot of writing over his lifetime, and so we have a good record of who he was. Through the letters that have survived, which have been collated by his son Memmius, who was devoted to his father, we get a real window into the life of this man who was desperately trying to preserve ancient Rome.
Symmachus is a leader of the Senate, and in the absence of the emperor in Rome, he's one of the most powerful people in the city.
Symmachus, in many ways, is a throwback, someone who is bound by tradition. He wants to maintain the old order and the reverence for the old gods. But there's a new god on the rise.
By the end of the 4th century CE, we think possibly as many as 50% of the population had become Christian.
Even both Roman emperors are now Christian. For Symmachus and his supporters, hosting games in the arena provides the perfect opportunity to push back at this new religion.
Symmachus and people like him would have seen the Colosseum and the games within them as absolutely essential to Roman life, to the greatness of Rome as a city.
The simple idea of staging games was an unsettling one to Christian senators, but it wasn't necessarily something that they absolutely thought could not happen.
There's no question that Christian senators would have attended Symmachus's games because more than anything else, this is a huge social event for Rome's elite. And even though some members of Rome's elite remained pagan, others had converted to Christianity, what tied them together far more than faith was the fact that they were members of Rome's elite.
But then there's a second unwelcome surprise. His name is Telemachus, a fanatical monk fiercely opposed to Rome's old ways.
He is an Eastern ascetic monk, someone who's renounced all worldly pleasure in his search for Christian God.
He comes to Rome from the east, and because of that, looks with terrible eyes upon the things that were happening in the Colosseum. He's a man who wants to see that worldview come to an end.
He's the exact opposite of a Roman pleasure seeker.
In the name of the one true God!
He was on a collision course with the powers that be in Rome, and his beliefs are at complete odds with pagan beliefs.
In the name of the one true God!
What is he doing?
As far as he's concerned, what's happening in the amphitheater had to be stopped.
Stop him!
He wants to end these games.
In the name of our true God, stop! Stop! This is against God's teachings!
Take him from here now!
Leave! Or face his wrath!
What Telemachus did was unprecedented and was shocking. It really was the first time in close to 600 years that anyone had tried to stop a gladiatorial fight.
At any event where there's going to be bloodshed, the crowd has an expectation of violence. The bloodshed pulled the crowd in and kind of enraptured them. The people of Rome were always capable of exploding into violence.
The crowd became so outraged at having its entertainment interrupted that they threw stones at Telemachus.
So to have a Christian monk come in and disrupt the game, it's like stepping right into the cultural fault line that's dividing people right at the heart of Rome.
If Symmachus was trying to revive the traditional values of Rome, then it's a complete failure. Roman society had moved on.
Word of Telemachus's death in the Colosseum reaches the emperor in Milan. Horrified by the violence, he orders a total ban on gladiatorial combat throughout the empire.
things were never going to be the same. Nobody was ever going to spend the amount of money that Symmachus did. Nobody was ever going to go back in time and make Rome the center of the universe again.
(162 AD), Rome's golden age.
The empire of the mid-2nd century, it's at its pinnacle in terms of its territorial expanse and its wealth. It's an empire that is leading the world in science, in culture, in philosophy, and in medicine.
Rome is really the cultural center of the universe in this moment. Authors, doctors, architects, philosophers flock to the city because they are enticed by Rome itself.
Among those entranced by Rome is Galen of Pergamon, a brilliant medical scientist whose works are still studied today.
Galen is probably the single most influential figure in the history of medicine.
He was an author, a philosopher, a scientist, a doctor, and an incredibly ambitious man.
His writings survive, which is true for very, very few doctors from this period. And we know that he's exceptionally skilled and he has an ego to match.
Galen comes to the Colosseum to catch the eye of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, one of the empire's great minds.
Marcus Aurelius comes at the tail end of the 5 good emperors.
Marcus Aurelius was an intellectual and was very much engaged in philosophical reflection. And in fact, his nickname is sometimes the Philosopher King.
He was an extraordinary character. He'd been chosen as a very young man and trained to be emperor. And for once, they got it absolutely right.
But Marcus Aurelius does not rule alone. For the first time in Roman history, 2 emperors govern side by side.
Marcus Aurelius' adopted brother Lucius Verus, they were almost opposites. They reigned together perfectly because they were 2 sides of a coin. There's no greater example of how absolute opposite these men were as to their attitude to the Colosseum and to the games. Someone like Marcus, who was so intellectual, so philosophical, for him, the endless and pointless bloodshed made no sense. Lucius, on the other hand, absolutely lives for them. Yes, it's a vulgar sport, it's a vulgar vice to have, but he adores it.
A surgeon like Galen plays a crucial role in keeping gladiators alive, but he wants more.
Galen was such an ambitious and driven individual that he wanted to become the world's greatest doctor. He already thought of himself as such. He just wanted people to acknowledge it. By all accounts, the plague was a horrible, horrible disease. I mean, in addition to the expected diarrhea and vomiting and fevers, what happened to the skin was really disconcerting. Scabs would form and then fall off, leaving horrible lesions.
It was devastating in its effects. People didn't seem to have any previous immunity and killed a large percentage of the people that it infected.
No one is spared, including emperors.
Not you two.
It's nothing.
There's a doctor I met once. He cured Eudamus when no one else could. He claims to have an antidote to any poison.
You want to bring him here? To this?
I cannot simply watch you die.
The Roman Empire has never been free of diseases. But epidemics, like the one that Marcus Aurelius is experiencing, that's something new.
It rapidly became apparent to the high command and to the emperor himself that they were wrestling with a health crisis of the highest order. Marcus Aurelius reacted by summoning Galen from Rome.
Imagine that kind of emotion that would have been in Galen at that time. Here's my chance to actually serve the emperor directly And on the other hand, it's like, this is a really bad situation I'm going into.
The situation that Galen found when he reached Aquileia was more severe than anything he could have imagined.
Galen gives us some pretty detailed description of symptoms, and based on those symptoms, we think it was likely smallpox. It might have been the first appearance of smallpox in the Mediterranean world. There's some argument that he's seeing a lot of hemorrhagic smallpox, which is a really lethal form of smallpox where you get a lot of bleeding under the skin.
This crisis comes, in many ways, for the Empire, but in a very different and essential way for Galen, the defining challenge of his life. More than perhaps at any point in human memory, disease had become an existential threat to Rome itself.
The winter that he spent at Aquileia was very difficult for him. It's rare for him to express despair or a feeling of being overwhelmed, but that is exactly what he does. He treated hundreds of plague victims, and he says that the whole population struggled to survive that winter of plague in 168.
Verus didn't make it very far, only 50 miles from Aquileia. For Marcus Aurelius, he is left on his own to rule an empire that's stricken by plague, has enemies at the borders, an army that's been devastated by this disease. He knows that the responsibility is his to rule the Roman Empire by himself.
Galen must have been very relieved not to be on the front lines. And now he can turn his attention to his favorite activities: reading, writing, composing, scientific works, journals, and the like.
Galen is probably the single most influential figure in the history of medicine. He left us a massive collection of medical texts. In fact, he's probably the most prolific author in antiquity. His Greek works comprise about 1/8 of all ancient Greek manuscripts that we have. The knowledge that Galen's medical texts contain defined Islamic and European medicine for 15 centuries.
It's 107 AD. The Colosseum has been open for 27 years and stands as the ultimate symbol of Roman values.
The Colosseum was the purest expression of the Roman Empire. Put simply, it was the symbol of how to live as a Roman and how to die as a Roman, with strength, with courage, and with honor.
Let the games begin!
But now, controversial new fighters are stepping into the arena. Women.
So female gladiators, or also known as a gladiatrix, were extremely uncommon in Roman society for several reasons. Most of all, because they represented an inversion. Gladiators embodied masculine energy.
This twist on gladiatorial combat is supported by Emperor Trajan, who came to power 9 years earlier, in 98 AD.
Trajan was amazing character. He was a tough general. He was incredibly successful. He was unpretentious. He was immensely popular. He was really chosen as the ideal emperor from the beginning.
Yeah, Trajan had an interesting self-image. Best emperor, that was his self-image, the best. And he saw himself as Rome's emperor par excellence. He took all the best qualities of his predecessors, but also expanded Rome's empire to an unprecedented level.
During his 19-year reign, Trajan pushes the boundary of Rome to its greatest ever extent, winning Arabia, Armenia, Mesopotamia, and Dacia, which is modern-day Romania. By the end of Trajan's rule, the empire will stretch across 2 million square miles. His victories bring hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war to Rome, including female fighters from Dacia. They provide the perfect opportunity for fresh entertainment.
Trajan might have looked at a female gladiator as yet another sign of his greatness and his ability to bring ever new and more exotic spectacle to the people of Rome.
Politics is partly show business. The audiences in the Colosseum expected more and more forbidden and fascinating things. A fighting woman was the ultimate new delicacy to please the jaded appetites of the Roman crowd.
But one gladiatrix is different, Mevia. She is a rarity, a free citizen of Rome, and that fact enrages the popular satirist, Juvenal.
Juvenal expresses a real social anxiety. There's a conventional moral attitude that Rome had grown soft and that old-style Roman virtues had virtually disappeared. There was also a worry when fads, such as women practicing as gladiators, come in, that this would somehow tear the fabric of Roman society.
Fighting woman might be seen as a dilution of what made Rome great. It was also something that you wouldn't see a Roman do.
Mevia could well have been the first documented Roman woman to take the gladiator's oath.
Right, repeat after me. I will endure.
I will endure.
To be burned.
To be burned.
Chained.
Chained.
Beaten.
Beaten.
And slain by the sword.
And slain by the sword.
Make your mark. You understand this contract means?
I'm freer here than I was at home.
The gladiator's oath binds together the trainer and the gladiator. For better or worse, they are in it together. This is like a macabre marriage oath. She is signing herself over, body and soul.
The gladiator oath is one of the most serious vows you can take. You are committing yourself, life and limb, to the life of a gladiator. So you are willingly or voluntarily subjecting yourself to this rigorous training, knowing that at the end of it, you might die on the sands of the Colosseum.
Mevia willingly going into a ludus means that she's turning her back on her family. There's no way out for her. Her family probably would have disowned her because it would have been an embarrassment, a stain on the family's history.
She would never have been able to go back to them. She would never have been able to get married or have the life that her parents had expected for her.
All gladiatorial combat was a fight to the death, because if someone did not surrender and basically indicate that they had given up, the fight would continue until someone was killed.
a gladiator could submit. They would raise their finger in submission. The emperor would turn to the crowd and ask for their opinion about what he should do, whether the submitting gladiator should be allowed to live or whether he should be killed.
The Roman idea of clemency as an imperial virtue, this goes all the way back to Julius Caesar. But when we see it being activated, there's a positive side, but there's also a sinister side. And it's a way of the emperor signaling that I'm in total control.
Mevia's victory resonates far beyond the Colosseum's walls. But after her documented appearance in the arena, little is known about her. To have earned a place in Juvenal's writings, it's possible that she dominated female gladiatorial combat throughout Trajan's reign.